Haunted Hearts by Suzana Thompson. Episode 1. I almost didn't go to school that day. My sleep had been filled with restless dreams I couldn't remember, except for being scared and running away from someone or something. I convinced myself that the bad feeling I had was just a remnant from those nightmares and didn't mean anything. Also, it was Friday and I was going on a date. I couldn't call off sick from school and then expect my parents to let me go out that evening. So, I put on a pretty light pink top and a pair of jean shorts. We were only 2 weeks into school and the weather made it feel like it was still summer. The sun had given me tan skin and my first boyfriend. Matt had been a lifeguard at the pool where I'd spent the majority of my summer vacation, and he'd asked me out in July. Since he was popular, I hadn't expected him to still be with me once school started. That was why I hadn't gotten attached to him, why I hadn't gone all in on our relationship. "Liar," a voice in my mind whispered. "You know why your heart's not in it." I ignored my subconscious as I walked out of my house and got into Matt's car. He'd been driving me to school and driving me home, which was so much better than taking the bus. That wasn't why I liked him, though. Matt was genuinely a nice guy, despite his looks, popularity, and athletic ability. He'd been on our school's baseball team since freshman year, and he was apparently really good, so much so that he was likely to get a college scholarship for it before we graduated. I'd never been to one of his games, but I was planning to go this year once baseball season started in the spring. That was still many months away, since it was only the beginning of September. Matt smiled at me, and it was a bright, sunny smile. He had blonde hair and blue eyes, and I guessed that I'd always associate him with summer. Not only because our relationship had started during the summer, but because of his happy disposition. He had a golden glow and exuded warmth and happiness. It should have outshone the dark, brooding magnetism of my secret crush, but it didn't. Why was I so drawn to a guy who was so unapproachable? Yet he radiated this intense, powerful energy that caught my attention any time he was near. My eyes had been riveted to him the first time I saw him on my first day of high school. The rest of the people in the hallway had faded into the background as I stood staring at him. His hair was black as midnight, and his eyes were almost as dark. I was struck by a feeling of recognition, although I knew that I had never seen him before. I would have remembered his striking, dark beauty and powerful presence. I felt it even then, when we were fresh-faced, excited teens on our first day of high school. Well, I was excited. He was aloof and coolly confident, like a person who was much older than the rest of us, although he didn't look it. I later found out that he was the same age as me, and strangely enough was also born on the exact same day. While I stood watching him with arrested attention during our first encounter, his dark eyes had skimmed over me as he moved toward me in his motorized wheelchair. His gaze had traveled back up to my face and held mine, and I hadn't been able to look away. Time seemed to stop while my heart raced at an alarming speed. I'd stared at him as he closed the distance between us. His neutral expression never changed as he came to a stop in front of me. After holding my gaze for a moment, he finally said,
"You're blocking my locker."
I noted how deep and masculine his voice was, and then I realized that he was waiting for me to move. "Sorry," I said as I stepped aside. He hadn't acknowledged my apology or spared me another glance, and the sting of rejection had quickened my steps away from him. That had been 3 years ago, and my crush on him hadn't abated despite that being our only interaction. A sane person would have given up hope by then, but what kept me hooked was that he didn't completely ignore me. Sometimes I would catch him looking at me with a thrilling intensity that made me think that he was interested in me. Yet he had never smiled back at me when I had smiled at him to let him know I liked him. He'd only stared at me for another moment before looking away. I'd thought that maybe he was shy, although there was nothing timid about him. Still, wishful thinking had convinced me that I needed to try approaching him. After all, it had been a couple of years since our first encounter. So, I'd worked up the courage and started toward him the next time he directed that intense stare at me. It had been just as I'd exited the lunch line with my tray of food, and he'd caught my eye across the cafeteria. I'd halted and taken a fortifying breath before striding toward him like I was on a mission. He'd watched me, his gaze like a dare. He'd waited until I'd walked past my usual table, until I'd crossed the cafeteria, until it was clear to anyone that I was headed directly to where he sat, alone by choice. When I was only steps away from his table, his expression shifted to cold and unapproachable. I'd halted, losing my nerve as he regarded me with all the warmth of a polar ice cap. He'd then looked down at whatever book he was reading and hadn't glanced back up. Humiliation had swept over me, and I'd felt like a fool standing there while he ignored me. Since his table was at the edge of the cafeteria, I couldn't walk past it and pretend that I was on my way to one beyond his. If I hadn't been holding my lunch tray, I could have just continued on to the exit and escaped into the hallway. Instead, I was forced to turn around and head back past all the people who had seen me try to sit with him and get rejected. They had definitely noticed because I felt their eyes on me. Even worse, my friends had seen it too, since they'd spotted me walking past our table and had then watched to see where I was going. My best friend Abby informed me of this as soon as I set down my tray.
Wow, Hazel, you've got guts. When I saw you going by, I was wondering what the heck you were doing. But when I saw where you were going, I couldn't believe it. I didn't know you liked Devin. Why didn't you tell me?
I don't, I lied. I was just trying to be friendly. He sits by himself every day, and I thought maybe he could use a friend.
You don't have to be embarrassed about liking him,
Our friend, Sarah,
assured me. Lots of girls do.
Yeah,
Emily agreed. Apparently, nobody was buying my denial. I had to admit that my excuse for approaching him had been weak. Devin Culver was only lacking friends because he'd withdrawn from them. He'd been popular sophomore year when he'd emerged from his self-imposed exile from socializing. He was invited to parties, sat at the popular table in the cafeteria, and had hooked up with several girls. I didn't like to think about that, partly because it made me feel like an ass for assuming that he couldn't have sex, and partly because I was jealous. Not that I wanted to hook up with him. That was something I hadn't done with anyone yet, and I wanted to be in a relationship when it happened. None of those girls were in a relationship with Devin. I had no idea why he didn't have a girlfriend, and why he'd stopped socializing with the popular people. I had heard that he used to go to private school before his accident. He'd been only 13 years old when he'd ended up in a wheelchair after surviving the car crash that killed his twin brother and his mom. I wondered what he was like before that. Had he been more approachable? Somehow, I couldn't imagine him ever being warm and friendly. Maybe his aloofness was bred into him since he was born into one of the oldest and most distinguished families in Salem. We lived in Salem. Yep, that Salem. I wished that I was a witch, but I wasn't. Of course not, because that would have made me interesting, and I was completely unremarkable. The total opposite of Devin, who could definitely be mistaken for a warlock. Except for my name, Hazel Guthrie. That sounded witchy. Too bad I didn't match my name. I didn't even have hazel eyes. They were brown, a warm, friendly brown. Not intimidating at all. Not like Devin's eyes. They were brown too, but it was such a dark brown that they looked almost black. They were beautiful, of course, just like the rest of him, but intimidating. Just like the rest of him. Maybe it was the cold look in them. His eyes never looked warm and friendly. So why did I feel so drawn to him? Why did I look forward to seeing him every day at school and being in his presence? Why was it more exciting than being with my boyfriend? I was a terrible girlfriend who didn't deserve him. I shouldn't be infatuated with another guy while I was dating him, but my crush on Devin predated my relationship with Matt. That was how I justified it to myself. It wasn't like I developed the crush after Matt asked me out. It already existed, and it was unrequited. So, it was harmless. It wasn't like Devin was suddenly going to be interested in me when he hadn't been for the past 3 years. It wasn't like this year was going to be any different. He apparently wasn't interested in anyone anymore. After that interlude of socializing during sophomore year, he'd suddenly shut everyone out again and returned to being a loner. Now I was actually more popular than him, but only because I was dating Matt. He was the complete opposite of Devin. Blonde, blue-eyed, athletic, and easygoing. Everyone liked him, and I knew that I was lucky that he had chosen me. I was hoping to finally begin dating that year after deciding that I wasn't going to waste any more time pining after Devin. This time, my wish was fulfilled. Matt had been working as a lifeguard at the pool, and he'd asked me out about a month after summer break began. Suddenly, I was going on dates, experiencing my first kiss, and even going to homecoming. I had been having the senior year of my dreams, so why did I still feel like something was missing? Why was I still so aware of Devin?
Earth to Hazel.
I looked at my best friend, Abby.
Sorry to interrupt your fantasies.
She said. I startled. What? Had I spoken his name aloud?
Speak of the devil, here he comes.
With the excitement I always had when I saw Devin, I turned in my seat to see Matt approaching our table. Feeling guilty, I smiled at him.
Hey, Hazel.
He leaned down to give me a quick peck on the lips. I was surprised to see him because we didn't have the same lunch. How are you here?
We got out of class a little early for good behavior. Substitute today, just wanted to stop and see you.
The bell rang just then, and I automatically stood up in response. He gave me a wry smile.
I guess that's all the time we have. Too bad we don't have lunch together.
Yeah, I agreed, although I was secretly glad that we didn't. I was comfortable sitting with my friends, and I liked to steal glances at Devin. The guilt hit me again, and I picked up my tray. Okay, see you later,
I'll get that for you.
he said as he took my tray. Thanks, I told him, and took a step back in preparation of taking my leave. He was staying there because he had lunch now. He smiled warmly at me.
See you after school.
I returned his smile and turned to go. Abby walked out of the cafeteria with me and gushed.
He's such a great boyfriend.
He is, I agreed, and I'm a terrible girlfriend.
Maybe you'll get married one day, she continued.
That kind of talk made me uncomfortable. We've only been dating for 3 months. Let's not plan a wedding just yet.
At least not before prom.
She joked. We had to part ways then because our classes were on opposite sides of the building. I turned to walk down the hall and bumped into Devin, losing my balance and almost falling into his lap. His hands shot out to steady me. Sorry, I said, mortified at my clumsiness. He stared at me without saying anything, increasing my embarrassment. My face flamed as I hastily righted myself, and he let go of my arms while keeping his unnerving stare on me. After a prolonged beat, he glided around me and continued on his way like nothing had happened. That wasn't as easy for me to do, partly because I was embarrassed, but also because he touched me. I remembered the feel of his hands on my arms, and my stomach fluttered. He also smelled really good. It must have been some expensive cologne that he wore. He definitely didn't drench himself in it because the tantalizing scent was only noticeable due to my nearness to him. It was like it was drawing me closer, tempting me to sniff him more fully. Luckily, I had resisted and saved myself from further embarrassment. What happened in my last class of the day made the hallway incident pale by comparison. Devin was in 2 of my classes, which I had considered a gift from the gods. I got to see him in my first class and my last, so I started and ended my day with him. On that day, he stopped and dropped a folded piece of paper on my desk before heading to his own without saying a word. My heart pounded as I stared at it, hardly daring to believe it was a note from him. Finally, I picked it up and opened it with unsteady hands.
Hazel, I will drive you home today.
I read those few words over and over again, not believing what I was seeing. When the teacher began speaking, I quickly slipped the note between the pages of my textbook. Stealthily, I texted Matt while the teacher wasn't looking. He had been my usual ride home since we started dating. All I told him in my message was that I couldn't ride home with him and would explain later. I had no idea what I was going to say to him, but I wasn't turning down an invitation from Devin. It turned out to be the most awkward experience of my life. He didn't say a word to me after asking me for my address. I had been planning to give him directions, but he typed it into his GPS. The automated voice telling him where to turn was the only sound in the vehicle. I was not usually a shy person, but Devin had an unapproachable vibe. What could I say to him? Why did you decide to give me a ride home today after pretty much ignoring me all these years? I had the silly urge to give him a note like kids did in elementary school. Do you like me? Check yes or no. His neutral expression certainly gave me no clue as he kept his eyes on the road. I was still trying to work up the courage to start a conversation with him when we arrived at my house. Throwing caution to the wind, I asked, "Would you like to come in?" If that didn't make it obvious that I liked him, nothing would. He looked at me then, and my pulse jumped as he reached out to touch my arm. His hand remained there as he closed his eyes for a moment. When he opened them, he pulled his hand back and said,
No, thank you.
My face heated because his rejection of me was obvious. "Well, thanks for the ride," I managed before hastily getting out of his truck. I wasn't so graceful because I had to hop down off the footrail. No sooner did I close the passenger door and step back, and he was pulling out of my driveway. I stood there watching him take off down the street and drive off out of sight. Why? I wondered. Why did he offer to drive me home today? It was as much of an enigma to me as he was. I didn't get the terrible news until late that night. Matt never answered my text messages, so I assumed he was mad at me. Maybe he had found out that I ditched him to ride home with Devin. It wasn't surprising, since I had felt many eyes on us when I walked beside him through the school parking lot. I hadn't actually dared to look directly at them, but I knew that we were noticed. When Matt didn't show up for our movie date later that evening, I knew for sure that he must be mad. He might even decide to break up with me, I thought. It was the first Friday evening that I didn't spend with him since we began dating. I was still awake after 11 when my phone rang. Expecting it to be Matt, I was surprised to see that Abby was calling me. "Hello?"
Hazel, oh my God!
She sobbed. I thought immediately of her dad, who was a police officer. "What's wrong? Why are you crying?"
I'm coming over.
She hung up before I could say anything else. My parents looked up from the TV as I entered the living room. "Abby is coming over. She sounds really upset."
Oh no.
Mom responded, probably thinking the same thing I was. That fear intensified when only Abby and her mom showed up at our house.
Hazel, you're really okay.
Abby threw her arms around me in a fierce hug.
When Dad told me about Matt,
I pulled back to look at her. "Your dad's okay?" Then what she said hit me. "Wait, what about Matt?" Abby looked away from me, and her mom came to put an arm around my shoulders and gently guide me toward the love seat.
Why don't you sit down?
Something cold constricted my heart. What happened to Matt? Abby started crying again.
there was an accident.
"Oh my God!" I pulled away from them and rushed to the entryway closet where I kept the shoes I wore the majority of the time. My dad was the one who approached me as I tied my sneakers.
Honey, come sit down for a minute.
"I have to see him, Dad." I stood up from my crouch and saw his face. "Dad," I whispered.
I'm sorry, Hazel.
He said gently.
He didn't make it.
He tried to put his arm around me, but I ran into the living room. What he said was impossible. He had to be mistaken because I just saw Matt earlier in the day. He came to say hi to me at lunch. He couldn't just suddenly be dead. I halted when I saw the expression on my mom's face. Abby's mom was trying to console her as she wept beside her on the love seat. I ran to her and sank to my knees in front of her. "Tell them it's not true." When Abby looked at me with her tear-stained face, I couldn't deny it any longer. I stared at her as I trembled with the horrible knowledge, and then my own tears came. Abby and her mom ended up staying that entire sleepless night. The funeral was on Tuesday, and most of the senior class attended. Besides going to that sad event, I stayed home the whole week. I learned the details of the accident. A drunk driver slammed into Matt's car head-on as he drove home from school. The guy was going 50 in a 25-mile zone when he drifted over into Matt's lane. He was killed instantly, but the drunk driver survived the crash and was taken to the hospital. His license had already been revoked for driving under the influence, but that hadn't stopped him from getting behind the wheel.
Dad said that you would have been killed too if you had been in the car with Matt.
Abby told me. She came over after the funeral, and we were talking in my room. She shuddered and took in a deep breath. "Good thing Devin decided to give me a ride home," I retorted bitterly. Her eyes widened. "What?" That's when I confessed the whole thing to her. My guilt had been tearing me up, but telling her about my secret crush on Devin didn't make me feel any better. "I cheated on Matt." Her blue eyes were huge.
You mean you and Devin?
I sighed. "No, he just drove me home." Expelling a breath, I took another one in before saying, I went off with Devin and left Matt to die.
Didn't you hear me? Abby demanded. You would have been killed too. It's a miracle that Devin decided to give you a ride home. So, you had a crush on him. Who hasn't?
She made it sound like my crush on him was in the past, when it was still ongoing while I was dating Matt. Guilt sliced through me like a knife. I feel so awful, if only... I began to cry again. Abby hugged me, and I took comfort in her embrace. She was blinded by all our years of friendship and didn't see me as the horrible person I now knew I was. She pulled back to look at me.
You're not the only one who feels guilty. When Dad told me you weren't in the car with Matt, I felt so relieved. I'm sad about Matt, but losing you would have been the worst.
I was so crushed by my guilt and grief over Matt that I hadn't thought about what would have happened if I hadn't accepted that ride from Devin. But I started to question all the events of that day. By the time I returned to school the following week, I was consumed with Devin's role in the tragedy. I watched him at lunch and in the classes I had with him, but this time it was for a different reason than before. If he noticed my scrutiny, he didn't show it. My slow-building anger helped me get through the day because I was swamped by well-meaning people who didn't know how guilty I felt every time they offered me their condolences. My teachers told me to take as much time as I needed with the makeup work from the week I had missed. I was now past the point of tears and ready to confront Devin. When he arrived at his locker, I was waiting for him. "You knew," I accused him without preamble. His dark eyes flitted toward me, but his expression betrayed nothing. That was all the attention he spared me before opening his locker door and calmly filling his backpack with the books he needed. I stood there fuming as he completed his task and closed the door. He left without saying a word. It infuriated me, and I charged after him. "Why didn't you warn Matt?" I demanded as I came up beside him. He moved out of the path of other students exiting the school and stopped next to the wall.
Your grief has made you irrational.
I was on the verge of hysteria as I let loose on him. "I'll tell you what's irrational. Liking someone who can't be bothered to care about anyone. God, I always thought you were so cool, but now I know you're as cold as ice." For a moment, there seemed to be some kind of emotion in his eyes as he listened to my outburst, but then his neutral expression made me think I had imagined it.
I'm sorry for your loss.
He said with all the feeling of a robot. It was a clear conclusion to the conversation as he resumed his journey out of the school and into the parking lot. I was too fired up to be deterred, though, and I followed him to his truck. "No, scratch that. Ice has the ability to melt, but you're made of stone,"
I'll give you a ride home.
was his only response. "Why?" I taunted. "Is the bus going to crash too?" The stare he fixed on me, combined with the tone of his voice, had a chilling effect.
I've made allowances for you in your distress, but I'm telling you to stop the hysterics right now.
This side of him went way beyond intimidating, and it completely unnerved me. He unlocked the doors.
Get in.
He commanded in the same hard tone. Suddenly wondering if I should run, I nevertheless sat down in the passenger seat and pulled the door shut. Buckling my seatbelt, I dared a glance at Devin, who was already settling in to drive. I stayed silent until he pulled out of the parking lot, and then I tried taking a different approach. "I'm sorry I attacked you like that. You saved my life." When he didn't respond, I continued in a tentative tone. "I'm just wondering why you didn't warn Matt about what was going to happen." He was silent for so long that I thought he wasn't going to answer.
How could I possibly know what was going to happen?
"I don't know, but you did. Why else would you offer to drive me home on that exact day?"
Maybe I like you.
He said. How many times had I fantasized about hearing him say those words to me? In the past, I would have had hope that he actually meant it. "You don't act like you like me. You didn't even talk to me after you asked for my address."
I lost my nerve.
His eyes were still on the road as he drove. All the fight had gone out of me. "Listen, I understand if you want to keep this a secret, but there's no one else here besides us. Why don't you just admit that you knew the accident was going to happen?"
Because I didn't.
He insisted. With a heavy sigh, I turned away from him to stare out the window until we arrived at my house. "Thanks for the ride," I said, not bothering to glance at him.
Hazel,
he said, and I turned to see him looking at me.
Forget about these delusions.
He held my gaze for a moment and then looked away to signal that our conversation was finished. I got out of his truck and started walking up the driveway without waiting for him to leave. He had failed to convince me that my conclusion was wrong, but it was clear that he wasn't going to admit the truth.